So in October 1901, the President of the United States hosted a dinner party that, well, it nearly started a second civil war.
Oh, absolutely. The press just completely exploded over it.
Right. Southern politicians were raging, death threats were issued left and right, and the scandal was literally just that President Theodore Roosevelt sat down to eat a meal in the White House with a black man as his equal.
Yeah, the mere idea of shared dining was just, it was too much for them. It caused this incredibly vicious racist backlash.
But the guest sitting right across from the president wasn't just any man. And there's this wild, surprising detail from that exact night.
Oh, the coat mix-up.
Yes. The Austro-Hungarian ambassador was actually visiting the White House the same night, and on his way out, he accidentally grabbed this guest's coat. And in the pocket, he found, of all things, the left hind foot of a graveyard rabbit.
Supposedly killed in the dark of the moon, right?
Exactly, just sitting in his pocket.
It is such a phenomenal juxtaposition because, on one hand, you have the absolute epicenter of global political power right during the most tense racial standoff of the new century.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, you have a pocket talisman of Southern folk magic. But, that duality perfectly encapsulates the man who was wearing the coat.
Which brings us to our mission for today's deep dive.
Yeah.
We are unpacking the life, the massive controversies, and the really enduring legacy of Booker Taliaferro Washington.
It's a huge topic.
It really is. For you listening, we're looking at a man who went from an enslaved boy who didn't even know his own birth date to living this wild double life as the most powerful and, honestly, arguably the most secretive political activist in America.
And the central tension we really have to establish here, and it's a question historians are still hotly debating today, is, well, how do we define his actions?
Right, the core debate.
Exactly. Was Booker T. Washington just a submissive accommodationist? Did he ask his people to just accept white supremacy, which is what his harshest critics claimed? Or was he this brilliant clandestine strategist playing a highly dangerous, incredibly effective long game for survival?
Okay, let's unpack this by going all the way back to the beginning, just to see how that strategy was forged. Our sources tell us he was born enslaved around 1856 in Hales Ford, Virginia.
And we really have to say around 1856.
Right, because he didn't actually know his exact date, month, or even year of birth until some evidence surfaced way after his death.
Yeah, his mother, Jane, was enslaved, and his father was a white man from a neighboring plantation who played, well, absolutely zero financial or emotional role in his life.
None at all. And the conditions of his early childhood were just harrowing.
Oh, completely. In his autobiography, he wrote that he couldn't recall a single instance where his family actually sat down at a table together to eat what we'd call a civilized meal. He described getting meals the way dumb animals get theirs. Just a scrap of meat here, a piece of bread there, usually eaten out of a skillet or just from a tin cup.
And then, the spring of 1865 happens, the Civil War ends, U.S. troops come into the region of Virginia. Washington is, he's about 9 years old at this point.
A very impressionable age.
Yeah, and he experiences the visceral thrill of emancipation firsthand. He has this vivid memory as a stranger, which was presumably a Union officer standing and reading the Emancipation Proclamation aloud to the enslaved families.
Wow.
And his mother leans over and kisses her children, just tears of joy streaming down her face. They were finally free.
But freedom didn't mean instant comfort. Following that, they relocated to the new state of West Virginia to join his stepfather. And this environment introduces what is really the defining spark of Washington's life.
The drive for literacy.
Exactly. A consuming drive for literacy. He was working in these brutal salt furnaces and coal mines, literally earning pennies for his family. He was completely illiterate, but he started painstakingly teaching himself to read in the dark, dirty corners of those mines.
And when he finally gets the chance to attend a newly established school, he runs into this really stark administrative problem.
Oh, the name issue.
Right, he only has one name, because enslaved people often weren't given surnames. So the teacher asks for his last name for the registration, and he simply invents one on the spot.
He just chooses Washington.
Just chooses it.
Yeah.
Though later in life, his mother revealed she had originally named him Booker Taliaferro at birth, but the enslaver just never used it.
And upon learning that, he reclaimed the middle name immediately, which, this naming process wasn't just some bureaucratic necessity. It was a really profound act of self-determination.
And that determination, it reaches a boiling point when he turns 16. He decides he's going to attend the Hampton Institute in Virginia, which was a school for freedmen.
But he doesn't have the money to get there.
Right. Lacking money for a train ticket, he travels hundreds of miles, mostly on foot. He's literally sleeping under elevated wooden sidewalks.
Good grief.
Yeah. And he arrives totally exhausted, completely broke, covered in dirt. The white-head teacher looks at him super skeptically. And instead of giving him a written entrance exam, she hands him a broom.
A broom.
A broom. She tells him to sweep an adjoining recitation room.
And he didn't just sweep it. He swept that room 3 times. He dusted the woodwork, the walls, the benches, 4 times over.
Wow.
Yeah, when the teacher returned, she rubbed her handkerchief on the woodwork and couldn't find a single particle of dust. She admitted him on the spot.
I always think about the psychology of that moment. That broom was basically his first standardized test.
Absolutely.
He knew those white administrators didn't care about his intellectual potential yet. They were testing his compliance, his work ethic, his attention to detail. By making that room utterly spotless, he was speaking the only language they respected at the time.
What's fascinating here is why education, and specifically the mastery of these tasks, held such massive weight. Washington noted that the newly emancipated African-American community, they practically worshipped books.
Really? Like worshipped?
Yeah, there was this prevailing belief that the mere possession, or even just the handling of books, would magically make them great and strong and useful men. Education was viewed as the ultimate proof of their humanity.
And their undisputable right to citizenship.
Exactly.
Well, that reverence for education is what drove Washington from merely acquiring knowledge to basically weaponizing it for others. Because by 1881, he's just 25 years old, and his reputation at Hampton leads to a recommendation to head up a brand new school.
The Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute in Alabama.
Right. Though Institute is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence.
Oh, for sure.
It started in a dilapidated single room that was donated by a local church. The roof was so leaky that a student literally had to hold an umbrella over Washington while he taught.
But he didn't let that stop him. He quickly realized that, teaching Greek and Latin to impoverished students who were living in sharecropper shacks, that wasn't going to solve their immediate crisis.
Right.
So the next year, he secured a loan to buy a ruined former plantation. And he didn't hire contractors to build a campus. He had the students physically build the school from the soil up.
They literally dug the clay, constructed kilns, and figured out how to bake their own bricks.
Yeah.
And our sources say that took several failed attempts before they got it right.
Yeah, trial and error.
But they did it. They raised the barns, constructed the classrooms, grew their own crops to sustain themselves.
Because the overarching objective at Tuskegee wasn't just to churn out individual carpenters or farmers. The goal was to train an army of teachers who were proficient in both academics and vital trades.
Right, so they could fan out.
Exactly, fan out across the rural South, bringing practical skills and literacy to just utterly destitute communities.
And building this empire was really a family affair for him. He was married 3 times, first to Fanny, then Olivia, and finally Margaret.
And bringing his wives into the leadership fold wasn't just a matter of convenience. It set a really powerful public example.
How so?
Well, at Tuskegee, Black women were expected to be highly educated administrators and departmental leaders, right alongside the men. They lived in this prominent campus home called the Oaks, and Washington also recruited brilliant minds, like George Washington Carver, to head the agriculture department.
Which created this thriving hub of self-sufficiency.
Exactly.
But wait, looking at that from a modern perspective, and I want you, the listener, to think about this, wasn't he essentially doing the Jim Crow South's dirty work?
That is a very common question.
Right, because teaching Black men and women to just be quiet laborers, brickmakers, and farmers, that seems like exactly what white supremacists wanted. Why not push for them to be lawyers and politicians?
Yeah, and that is the core criticism leveled against him. But to understand his strategy, you have to look at the underlying mechanics of his logic. Washington was operating in the Deep South during a period of escalating, horrific violence.
Right, the reality on the ground.
He believed that if African Americans demanded political power without first securing an economic foundation, they would just be crushed.
Yeah.
His theory was that if Black citizens provided indispensable economic skills, if they became the best mechanics, the best agriculturalists, literally the foundation of the Southern economy, the white majority would eventually have to accept them.
Out of pure self-interest.
Exactly. Economic independence, in his mind, was the shield that would eventually force political equality.
And honestly, Tuskegee's model was so highly profitable and efficient that white Southern politicians started pointing to it as the quote-unquote correct way for Black Americans to behave.
Which is deeply complex.
Very. And that localized attention is exactly what forced Washington onto the national stage in 1895. He was invited to speak at the Atlanta Cotton States and International Exposition, addressing a mixed-race audience.
And this address becomes his defining legacy. In what his supporters called a masterpiece of diplomacy, Washington urged African Americans to cast down your bucket where you are.
Which meant what, exactly?
It meant he advocated a go slow approach. He told his community to concentrate all their energies on industrial education and wealth accumulation rather than immediately agitating for civil rights, social equality, or voting rights.
He literally held up his hand during the speech and said, "In all things that are purely social, we can be as separate as the fingers, yet one as the hand in all things essential to mutual progress."
Yeah.
And as our sources note, that speech created a monumental rift in black leadership, because this is where we see the rise of W.E.B. Du Bois, a brilliant Northern activist, sociologist, and scholar who demanded immediate civil rights and due process of law. Now, we want to be clear to you listening, we're not taking sides here, but we need to impartially look at what both camps were arguing.
Absolutely. Du Bois fundamentally rejected Washington's focus on manual labor. He championed the concept of the talented 10th, which was the idea that a highly educated elite trained in the classical liberal arts should lead the race forward into political power.
Right.
Du Bois famously dubbed Washington the Great Accommodator and labeled that 1895 address the Atlanta Compromise.
Because to really grasp this historical divide, we have to recognize the deep philosophical clash here. This was a battle between economics and politics.
Very well put.
Washington believed economic value was the ultimate protection. But Du Bois argued that without political rights, specifically the right to vote, and without legal equality, any wealth or property Washington's followers built could just be legally stolen or destroyed by white mobs.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, geography and environment explain everything. Du Bois was operating primarily in the North, where advocating for legal equality was, relatively speaking, safer.
Right.
Washington was physically located in the Deep South, where the reality was incredibly bleak. Between 1890 and 1908, Southern legislatures were systematically rewriting their constitutions. They were entirely stripping black men of the voting rights they had gained during Reconstruction.
And they didn't just ban black people from voting outright, because that would violate the 15th Amendment.
Right, they had to be sneaky about it.
Very. They used these insidious legal mechanisms. They instituted poll taxes, which impoverished sharecroppers just couldn't afford. They created subjective literacy tests, where a white registrar might ask a black college graduate to interpret a super complex clause of the state constitution, while asking a white farmer to simply write his name.
But the most blatant mechanism was the grandfather clause.
Oh, yeah.
That was a legal loophole stating you could only vote if your grandfather had the right to vote before 1867.
Which is just, wow.
Right. Since the grandfathers of formerly enslaved men were entirely disenfranchised, it was a mathematical trap. It was perfectly designed to legally block black voters while protecting poor, illiterate white voters.
So in this environment, facing down constant threats of lynching, Washington genuinely believed that frontal aggressive assaults on white supremacy were just suicidal.
He did.
But here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, yes.
Because if you only read his public speeches, you'd assume Washington was just quietly accepting segregation. But the historical sources reveal he was running a massive covert intelligence network.
It's like something out of a spy novel.
Seriously.
Yeah.
While he was publicly preaching patience to white Southerners, privately, he was the Wizard of Tuskegee, orchestrating a secret resistance.
Historians refer to this network as the Tuskegee machine. Washington realized that to maintain his influence, he needed absolute control over the narrative. So he didn't just charm newspaper editors, he secretly bought financial stakes in black newspapers across the country.
Wow, holding the purse strings.
Exactly. By doing that, he dictated their editorial lines. He created this echo chamber of support for his policies while actively suppressing the voices of critics like Du Bois.
But I think the most stunning secret was his legal activism.
Oh, for sure.
While publicly telling black Southerners not to agitate for voting rights, he was secretly and substantially funding the very lawsuits trying to tear Jim Crow down.
Yes.
He quietly channeled huge sums of money into cases like the 1903 Supreme Court case Giles v. Harris, which directly challenged voter restrictions in Alabama.
And to pull this off, he utilized classic espionage tactics. He communicated with lawyers and activists using code names.
Code names.
Literally code names. He funneled money through third parties to hide his tracks because he knew that his public accommodationist stance was the only shield keeping Tuskegee and, frankly, his own life safe from right retaliation.
Because if Southern politicians had discovered he was funding the NAACP's legal strategies.
Tuskegee would likely have been burned to the ground.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And part of why he needed that unthreatening public persona was his unbelievable ability to extract capital from white megadonors.
Oh, he was a master at this.
Right. He was sitting in boardrooms with the richest self-made men of the Gilded Age. We're talking Andrew Carnegie, George Eastman of Kodak, Henry Huddleston Rogers of Standard Oil.
And Rogers is a prime example of how Washington operated. After hearing Washington speak, Rogers quietly funded 65 small country schools for African Americans alongside massive donations to Tuskegee.
But he did it with a fatch, right?
Yes, he used a matching fund requirement. It was a financial mechanism that Washington eagerly adopted and then scaled way up.
And that matching fund model reached its absolute zenith when Washington teamed up with Julius Rosenwald, who was the part owner and president of Sears, Roebuck and Company.
A hugely significant partnership.
Together, they launched one of the most staggering educational initiatives in American history.
Because Washington and Rosenwald recognized this glaring injustice, white-dominated state legislatures were collecting taxes from black citizens, but deliberately refusing to fund segregated black schools.
It's infuriating.
So Washington deployed Tuskegee's own architects to draft highly efficient, modern school designs. The Rosenwald Fund then offered seed money to rural black communities across the South to build these schools.
But only if the community matched the funds.
Exactly.
The sheer scale of this is mind-boggling. They built nearly 5,000 schools, plus teachers' homes, vocational shops, across 15 states. At their peak, these facilities accommodated 1/3 of all African-American children in southern U.S. schools.
It's an incredible achievement.
But, as our sources point out, there is a deeply tragic irony embedded in this success.
There really is. The matching grant mechanism meant that incredibly impoverished black families had to donate their own physical labor, supply their own land, and raise millions of dollars out of their own meager pockets.
Yeah.
Because the state withheld their tax dollars, these communities essentially had to tax themselves twice just to secure basic literacy for their children.
It's a heartbreaking testament to their sheer desperation for education. So, looking at all this, what does this all mean for how we view him today? You have the public conciliation, the secret lawsuits, the ruthless media control, the massive educational fundraising. It leaves historians profoundly split.
It really does. This raises an important question about the intersection of leadership and morality. Many historians view Washington as an altruistic genius.
Right.
They see a master psychologist who expertly played a rigged, deadly political game by its own twisted rules.
Yeah.
And he extracted millions of dollars from white capitalists to build a foundation for black survival.
But then the other camp points to a darker reality. They argue he functioned as a self-serving, autocratic political boss.
Yes, the boss critique.
They point out that his Tuskegee machine demanded absolute, unquestioning loyalty, and that he used his power to financially ruin his rivals within the black community who aligned with Du Bois. They argue he spent more time consolidating his own power than actually pushing the needle on civil rights.
And honestly, the truth likely encompasses both extremes. He was a man holding profound contradictions, balancing immense power with just constant, overwhelming vulnerability.
Which brings us to this sudden physical collapse of all that power. Because despite his national influence, the stress of this double life was taking a fatal toll on him. In late 1915, while traveling in New York City, Washington collapsed.
Yeah, 2 different doctors evaluated him there, diagnosing him with Bright's disease, which is a severe inflammation of the kidneys, and they told him he had only days to live.
And Washington insisted that he was born in the South, he had lived and labored in the South, and he intended to die in the South.
He was very resolute about that.
Very. He boarded a train, arrived at his beloved Tuskegee shortly after midnight on November 14, 1915, and he passed away just a few hours later. He was only 59 years old.
And for decades, it was widely reported that he simply died of congestive heart failure brought on by overwork.
Which makes sense given his schedule.
Right. But a modern medical investigation in 2006, which was conducted with his descendants' permission, reviewed his medical records and found the true culprit.
What was it?
He had profoundly severe hypertension. His blood pressure was more than twice the normal level, which completely destroyed his kidneys and caused his heart to fail. The immense, continuous psychological pressure of his secret resistance literally broke his body.
Wow. But the physical empire he left behind was undeniable. By the time he died, the Tuskegee Institute had grown from a leaky church room to over 100 well-equipped buildings.
Yeah, 1,500 students, a faculty of 200 teaching 38 different trades.
And a massive endowment of around $2 million.
He proved that an institution run entirely by Black educators and administrators could not only survive in the Deep South, but could become a world-renowned model of efficiency and progress.
It is an almost unbelievable trajectory.
Huh.
And that leaves us with a final thought. I want you, the listener, to really mull over. In his famous autobiography, Up from Slavery, Washington wrote that success is to be measured not so much by the position one has reached in life, but by the obstacles which he has had to overcome.
That's a powerful quote.
It is. And when you look at his vast network of nearly 5,000 rural schoolhouses across the South, you have to ask yourself a profound question about the long arc of history. Was Booker T. Washington actually building a slow-motion Trojan horse? By publicly playing the obedient, unthreatening role that the Jim Crow South demanded, did he secretly build the educational and economic foundation that would eventually empower the very civil rights movement that later criticized him? It's a testament to the fact that history is rarely a simple battle between heroes and villains. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning those simple historical narratives, look for the hidden mechanisms driving the story, and we'll see you next time.